In just 3 years, the world's second-largest air force has lost over 160 confirmed aircraft. We're talking billions of dollars in military gear simply vanishing from the skies. But recently, in a single drone attack, more than 40 Russian aircraft were destroyed, showing a vulnerability few could have imagined possible just a few years ago. What you're about to discover goes way beyond cold numbers. This is the story of how one of the most feared air forces on the planet turned into a shadow of its former self, and how that's costing big, not just militarily, but is literally draining the Russian economy in a way that could reshape the global geopolitical future. In February 2022, when the first Russian aircraft crossed into Ukrainian airspace, few military analysts imagined they'd witness one of the biggest transformations in military aviation since World War II. The expectation was for a swift, devastating air campaign, similar to what we saw in Iraq in 1991 or Yugoslavia in 1999. But something totally different happened. The Ukrainian resistance created a lethal combo: multi-layered air defense systems, innovative tactics with low-cost drones, and Western tech support that turned every Russian military flight into Russian roulette. What was supposed to be a show of force became a war of attrition that's literally eating the Russian Air Force from inside. The Russian aerospace forces have fewer than 650 tactical aircraft when you count only those actually fit to fly, a number already worrying before the conflict began. Conservative estimates say Russia lost at least 100 fixed-wing aircraft in combat, but Ukrainian sources claim the number is much higher. Each Su-35 fighter jet costs about $85 million. Each Su-34 bomber is worth around $50 million. When we talk about over 160 confirmed losses, we're looking at something between $8 and $12 billion in military equipment that simply disappeared. But the impact goes way beyond money. Each lost aircraft also means losing experienced pilots, whose training took years and cost millions. It's like watching a library burn, where every lost book represents irreplaceable knowledge and experience. The situation is so critical that many Russian squadrons today operate at only 60% of their original capacity. The backbone of Russian aviation is still made up of aircraft that flew during the Cold War. Tu-22M bombers and Su-30 fighters with over 40 years of service are still being sent on missions like war veterans forced back to the battlefield. These air grandpas come with structural issues that make every flight a dangerous adventure. Imagine a 1980 car racing in a modern Formula One event. That's the reality many Russian pilots face daily. Russia manages to produce between 22 and 28 new aircraft per year, a pace that can't even come close to replacing current losses. The result is a maintenance backlog growing exponentially. Hangar after hangar full of aircraft waiting on parts that never arrive, trained pilots with no planes to fly, and operational capacity shrinking every month. If someone told me 5 years ago that drones costing a few $100s could take out $50 million fighter jets, I'd have laughed. But that's exactly what's happening in the skies over Ukraine, and now even inside Russian territory. The Ukrainians developed a strategy that seems straight out of sci-fi: swarms of small drones that penetrate Russian defenses and attack air bases directly. In recent operations, at least 6 Tu-95 MS bombers and 4 Tu-22M3S were destroyed in coordinated drone strikes. Imagine the irony: aircraft that took decades to develop and billions to build being taken out by gear that could be put together in a garage. This isn't just a tactical shift, it's a full-on revolution in how we think about air power. For Russian pilots, every takeoff is now a survival test. They don't know if they'll face guided missiles, drone swarms, or if their own bases will be safe when they return. The psychological pressure is huge, and it shows in mission effectiveness. Here we hit one of the most intriguing parts of this story: the battle of the numbers. Depending on who you ask, the state of Russian aviation ranges from worrying to catastrophic. NATO's American authorities suggest lower losses, while Ukrainian sources claim much higher figures. This disparity happens because there are different ways to count. Some only count aircraft shot down in direct combat. Others include planes damaged beyond repair, aircraft retired due to lack of parts, or even those that simply can't fly anymore due to accelerated wear. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but everyone agrees there's a significant operational gap at Russian bases. This means fewer daily missions, longer response times, and a reduced ability to react to emerging threats. It's like having an army with half its soldiers on medical leave. Russian strategic bombers have always been the ultimate symbol of Soviet and later Russian air power. The Tu-95 Bear, Tu-22M Backfire, and the impressive Tu-160 Blackjack were aircraft that made the whole world tremble during the Cold War. Today, those very aircraft are being destroyed on their own turf. Satellite images confirm that at least 20% of these strategic bombers were damaged or destroyed, a devastating blow to Russia's power projection capability. Without these sky giants, Russia was forced to completely change its strategy. Instead of precise long-range bombing, they now rely on standoff weapons with much less accuracy. It's like swapping a scalpel for a hatchet. It still cuts, but causes way more collateral damage. This forced change has implications far beyond the battlefield. It signals to the world that Russia can no longer guarantee the safety of its most valuable military assets, even on its own soil. Here we get to one of the most fascinating and least understood aspects of this crisis, the collapse of the maintenance system. Keeping a modern fighter jet operational is like caring for a critically ill patient. It demands constant attention, specific parts, and highly specialized technical knowledge. Western sanctions cut Russia's access to essential components made in Europe and the U.S. high-performance turbines, advanced electronics, special metal alloys, all became contraband. The result is many aircraft are literally cannibalized to keep others flying. Some fighters are flying 3 to 4 times more hours than their manuals recommend before major overhauls. Imagine driving a race car for 200,000 kilometers without ever having the engine checked. That's exactly what's happening with $50 million aircraft. Pilots report unexpected failures during missions, commanders hesitate to send certain aircraft on risky ops, and mechanics work with improvised parts that should be replaced with originals. It's a vicious cycle consuming Russian aviation from the inside. For decades, Russian pilots trained for a totally different reality: territorial defense, strict ground control coordination, and operations in controlled environments. The current conflict demanded a radical adaptation to offensive missions, agile and decentralized combat, similar to what Western forces have practiced for decades. But here's the problem. Russian pilots fly only 90 to 120 hours per year, a number considered insufficient by any Western standard. On top of that, training programs were drastically cut, going from 5 years down to less than 2. It's like trying to train surgeons in an intensive weekend crash course. Young pilots hit the front lines with no real experience in complex combat situations. This training gap became clear in intercepted communications, where Russian aircraft followed predictable patterns, making enemy attacks easier. It's the difference between improvising jazz and following a rigid symphony score. When you can't get close to the enemy anymore, you have to strike from afar. That was the logic behind Russia ramping up the use of GPS-guided glide bombs. Between 2023 and 2024, the frequency of these attacks grew 16 times, a number showing Russian tactical desperation. These bombs can be launched from dozens of kilometers away, keeping aircraft out of enemy defense range. Sounds smart, but there's a big problem. The margin of error can be hundreds of meters. To cover for this inaccuracy, the Russians have to use multiple bombs to make sure at least one hits the target. It's like trying to hit a dartboard blindfolded. You throw many times hoping at least one lands right. This strategy not only skyrockets logistical costs, but also creates internal political and economic fallout. Every wrong bomb that hits civilian infrastructure becomes a diplomatic headache and a reconstruction expense. In a desperate attempt to cover losses, Russia started pulling aircraft from military graveyards, literally resurrecting planes retired for decades. Su-24s and MiG-29s aged 30 or 40 years returned to active service. It's like calling retirees back to work during a business crisis. These ghosts of the skies can fly and carry weapons, but are technologically inferior and way more vulnerable than modern aircraft. This resurrection strategy has a silver lining, preserving the more sophisticated aircraft for truly critical missions. But it also shows how desperate the situation has become. When a military superpower has to rummage through scrapyards, it says a lot about the state of its forces. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the economic impact. Russia ramped up defense spending to 6.3% of GDP in 2025, the highest level since the Cold War. Military expenses jumped over 40% in real terms in 2024 alone. In 2024, the Kremlin will spend a record 16.3 trillion rubles, about $147.5 billion, on the conflict, over 8% of GDP and 41% of the total central budget. This financial bleeding creates a vicious cycle. The Russian money supply nearly doubled between 2022 to 2024, causing huge inflationary pressures. It's like printing cash to buy gear that's destroyed faster than it can be replaced. The result is an increasingly militarized economy where resources that should go to education, health, and civil infrastructure are drained to feed a military machine that consumes more than it produces. If this keeps up, what should we expect in the coming months? Russia is in a race against time on multiple fronts. First, it needs to protect its remaining air bases, a task made exponentially harder by advancing drone technology. Second, it must speed up fleet modernization, but that means dodging increasingly sophisticated international sanctions and finding substitutes for Western parts. It's like trying to build a smartphone using only domestically made parts, theoretically possible, but practically extremely challenging. Third, it must completely overhaul its pilot training system. Having aircraft isn't enough. You need pilots capable of flying them effectively in modern combat. That demands a deep cultural shift in a traditionally conservative institution. Fourth, it has to diversify its arsenal, investing more in drones and long-range missiles to reduce the exposure of manned aircraft. This transition took other air forces decades. Russia has to do it in a few years. What we're witnessing goes far beyond a specific military crisis. It's a total reshaping of global air power. Countries that traditionally relied on buying Russian aircraft now question the reliability of that tech. China is speeding up its own military aviation development, seeing a chance to fill the space Russia is losing. European countries are investing more in air defense, realizing the Russian threat isn't as intimidating as it once seemed. For the US and NATO allies, this situation is both an opportunity and a challenge. On one hand, it confirms the superiority of their tactics and tech. On the other, it raises uncertainty about the behavior of a nuclear power with declining conventional military capabilities. What started as a military operation meant to show Russian air power turned into the biggest crisis in Russian military aviation since World War II. We're not just seeing impressive loss numbers, we're witnessing a fundamental transformation in how air power works in the 21st century. History teaches us that major military shifts often predict even bigger geopolitical changes. The fall of Russian air supremacy might be the start of a global reshuffling we're only beginning to understand. For those of you who stuck around till here, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Russia can recover from this crisis, or are we witnessing the definitive end of its era as an air superpower? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This conflict is far from over. The revolution in the skies is just beginning, and you won't want to miss a single chapter of this extraordinary story.